When the lights go out, a world without electricity. Imagine a world where, in the blink of an eye, every electrical device shuts down, indefinitely. The hum of the refrigerator, the glow of streetlights, the buzz of a smartphone, all vanish. No warning, no explanation, and most importantly, no way back. A global electrical blackout would not just be inconvenient, it would be catastrophic. This essay explores what could happen if the world were suddenly and permanently without electricity, examining the potential responses from governments, the behavior of society, and the long-term implications for humanity. The first hours, confusion and denial. The initial moments after a total global blackout would be eerily quiet. In homes, lights would flicker and die, appliances would fall silent, and digital clocks would freeze. At first, people might not react with alarm. Power outages happen. In some areas, they're a common inconvenience. But as the minutes tick by with no restoration, unease would begin to spread. Commuters stuck in subway tunnels or on electric trains would wait patiently, assuming an announcement or emergency lighting system would guide them. But no announcement comes. Elevators would stall between floors. Office buildings would grow hot or cold without HVAC systems. At airports, boarding would be delayed, and tower communication would suddenly cut out. Pilots mid-flight would be unable to reach ground control. At home, people would instinctively reach for their phones to check the news or contact loved ones, only to discover they have no signal. Cellular towers rely on power, and once their limited backup batteries die, so does mobile communication. Television sets would be useless. Radio silence would become literal. Even car radios might offer no information if broadcast towers are offline. Despite this growing strangeness, most people would still cling to the belief that this is a localized issue, maybe a severe technical fault or a regional grid failure. Some would expect power to return within the hour. Businesses might send employees home early. Schools might dismiss classes, assuming it's just a precautionary measure. In this window of time, denial and hope would be the dominant emotions. Governments and emergency services would scramble to assess the scope of the outage. Control centers would go dark. Command structures would collapse into chaos. Coordination between local, regional, and national authorities would become nearly impossible. Even emergency broadcasts, which are designed to function in crises, would falter without transmission capability. For the first time in modern history, the informational lifeline of humanity, the Internet, would vanish entirely. Hospitals would switch to backup generators, prioritizing life support systems and emergency rooms. But uncertainty would ripple through the medical staff as they realize there is no communication with health authorities or other hospitals. Patients in critical condition would be watched closely, but many hospitals would be unable to admit new emergencies due to overwhelmed systems. By the third or fourth hour, traffic jams would spread as traffic lights fail, and confused drivers attempt to navigate congested intersections. Gas stations would shut down, unable to pump fuel. Supermarkets, unable to process transactions, would start seeing the first signs of unrest. People walking out with unpaid groceries or demanding food from powerless employees. Social media would go silent, and this silence, paradoxically, would be what alerts many to the seriousness of the situation. We're used to a constant digital hum, notifications, updates, headlines. Its absence would signal that something much bigger is at play. The lack of information would create an information vacuum, and with it, panic. Rumors would begin to circulate on foot. Was it a cyber attack? a terrorist strike, a solar storm. In less than 6 hours, the fragile assumption that things will return to normal soon would begin to crack. Confusion would give way to unease, unease to fear. And all around the world, billions of people would begin to wonder, what if this isn't temporary? What if the power is gone, for good? The first days, panic and breakdown. As the reality of a prolonged power outage sets in, society would quickly begin to fracture. What began with confusion now escalates into widespread panic. Supermarkets, no longer able to restock shelves or refrigerate perishable items, would be overrun by desperate citizens. People would rush to buy anything they could: bottled water, canned food, candles, batteries. But inventory would disappear within hours. Long queues would form, arguments would erupt, and security personnel, if still present, would struggle to maintain order. Fuel shortages would become immediately visible. With electric pumps down and no digital payment systems, gas stations would close. Those with stored fuel would find themselves targets. Lines of cars would stretch for blocks at any open station, and black market trade for fuel would emerge overnight. This lack of mobility would affect everything: emergency response, food delivery, and medical transport. Ambulances, fire trucks, and police cars would be rendered nearly useless without access to gasoline. Water infrastructure would begin to collapse in many cities. While some water treatment facilities have generators, they are not designed for long-term use. Without electricity, water purification and distribution would falter. Taps would run dry, and sanitation would degrade rapidly. In densely populated areas, this could trigger a health crisis. Without running water, hygiene becomes nearly impossible, and the risk of disease spreads. The internet would remain down, and without it, communication becomes fragmented. The global population, accustomed to 24/7 connectivity, would feel isolated and disoriented. There would be no reliable news, no updates, no government guidance. In this silence, conspiracy theories and misinformation would spread through word of mouth. People would speculate about war, aliens, secret weapons, or divine punishment. With no way to verify anything, panic would be fueled by uncertainty. Social order would deteriorate rapidly. In wealthier neighborhoods, people might initially try to maintain normalcy, organizing neighborhood patrols and rationing supplies. But in poorer or more densely populated areas, the strain would be immediate. Looting would become common, not just for electronics, but for essentials like food, medicine, and clean water. Pharmacies would be raided. Hospitals running on minimal power would be overwhelmed. Many would be forced to turn away patients, and some might shut down entirely. Law enforcement agencies would be stretched beyond capacity. With no functional communication between departments and a lack of fuel, response times would plummet. In some cities, entire police forces might abandon their posts to protect their own families. Military deployment might be considered, but even armies rely on logistics chains powered by electricity, communications, and fuel. A visible military presence could help deter violence temporarily, but it could also heighten fear and raise tensions further. Financial systems would come to a grinding halt. With no access to online banking or digital payment methods, people would revert to cash, if they had any. But with ATMs down and banks closed, cash itself would quickly lose value. In some areas, bartering would take its place. Gold, fuel, cigarettes, food, batteries, even ammunition might become currency. Trust in the financial system would collapse. In rural areas, the response might be less chaotic at first. People living off the grid or in self-sustaining communities might adapt more quickly. However, the isolation would come with risks: limited medical care, no external aid, and increasing threats from displaced urban populations looking for resources. By the end of the first week, the breakdown of modern society would no longer be theoretical. It would be reality. What once felt unthinkable would become normal. Cities without light, people fighting for water, the sounds of sirens replaced by silence or chaos. And in the absence of any clear authority or guidance, many would begin to ask the same question: what comes next? The first weeks: violence and survival. Within a few weeks, cities would become dangerous places. Without power, police systems would be crippled. No surveillance cameras, no communication between stations, and no centralized command. Crime would skyrocket. Desperate people might begin looting and raiding homes and businesses for food, water, medicine, and fuel. The lack of refrigeration would make food scarce. Even agricultural areas would suffer, as modern farms depend heavily on electrical equipment and machinery. Water purification plants would shut down, causing outbreaks of disease. Sewage systems would fail, leading to unhygienic conditions. Governments, overwhelmed and under-resourced, might collapse in some areas. Local communities would begin to organize themselves into survival groups. Small towns might fare better, relying on community farming, rivers, and traditional knowledge. But in densely populated cities, competition for resources would likely lead to violence. Refugee movements would begin as people abandoned cities in search of food, clean water, and safety. With roads blocked and transport limited, these migrations would be slow and dangerous. Borders might close. Some governments could impose martial law, while others would simply cease to function. The first months: adaptation or collapse. As months go by, society would face a critical juncture: adapt or collapse. Only communities with strong local organization and access to natural resources would survive. Farming would return to manual labor. Animals would become essential again, for plowing, transport, and food. People would return to older technologies: candles, wood stoves, paper records. The knowledge gap would be a major hurdle. Most people today lack the skills to live without electricity. Books, once forgotten, would become precious again, not just for entertainment, but for survival information. Trade would slowly restart, but on a local scale. Horses, carts, and bicycles would be in high demand. Artisans, blacksmiths, carpenters, seamstresses would regain their importance. Medicine would regress a century, relying on herbal remedies and physical diagnosis. Governments, if they still existed, might become more authoritarian, controlling what little resources remain. Alternatively, decentralized systems could emerge, based on mutual aid, local councils, or communal farming. The long-term consequences: a new world. Years after the blackout, the world would look nothing like the one we know today. Cities would be partially abandoned. Skyscrapers would stand empty. Nature would reclaim urban spaces. Birds would nest in broken streetlights, and weeds would grow through the cracks of highways. Some societies might adapt into self-sustaining communities. Others might fall into tribalism, ruled by warlords or self-proclaimed leaders. Religion or ideology could rise in power, offering explanations and hope in a darkened world. Education would become informal, passed down orally or through hand-copied books. Children born after the blackout might grow up without ever having seen a television, computer, or airplane. The stories of the old world would seem like myths. International relations would be frozen. No diplomacy, no global trade, no internet. Countries might splinter into regions. Some areas might retain a semblance of civilization, while others become lawless zones. Rebuilding the electrical grid would be nearly impossible. Without access to factories, engineers, global supply chains, or digital coordination, the knowledge and materials required to restore electricity on a national or global level would be out of reach. Civilization might regress by centuries, or adapt into a new form, shaped by resilience, localism, and memory. Could it happen? While the total and permanent loss of electricity is unlikely under current conditions, the scenario isn't pure science fiction. Massive solar flares, high-altitude nuclear detonations, EMPs, or coordinated cyber attacks could cripple electrical grids. The modern world is deeply interconnected and reliant on power. A single failure in one part of the system can cascade through others. Governments do have contingency plans, reserves, military infrastructure, emergency protocols, but these are designed for short-term crises. A permanent outage would test the limits of human adaptability, governance, and morality. Final thoughts. The loss of electricity would not just be a technological setback, it would be a psychological and societal upheaval. Our world is built on energy, data, and connectivity. In their absence, we would be forced to rediscover what it means to live, to survive, and to rebuild. Whether the result would be dystopia or renaissance depends not just on the systems we lose, but on the values we choose to preserve. If you found this video thought-provoking and you'd like to keep learning English while exploring real-world topics like this, make sure to hit that subscribe button. Don't forget to like the video, leave a comment with your thoughts, and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. Thanks for watching. And remember, learning English can be as exciting as discovering the world itself.